Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have never seen a Jewish audience so obedient, sitting down, ready to go. Not a sound, it's amazing. Thank you, guys. It just shows you how much we actually appreciate Douglas Murray and what he does for our community. And we've even started exactly on time. So I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the South African Jewish Report. I'd like to welcome the audience that is with us tonight in the hall, and also our online audience, which comprises of thousands and thousands of viewers across the world. So thank you for being with us. I also want to know that, first of all, from the Jewish Report point of view, we love to involve our community. We like to be here to enable conversations, to enable connection, and that's what this evening's about. We would also like to acknowledge the Podcast Party for offering this very, very special night for our community. Podcast Party is an initiative of One-on-One Productions who pioneered podcasting with the launch of cliffcentral.com almost a decade ago. It's a non-political party aimed at leveraging the power of content to encourage open dialogue and critical thinking, to engage and inspire, shape a future where meaningful conversations may transform into positive change. So thank you so much to you for enabling tonight. In a world that has gone dark once again for the Jewish people, where truth, basic humanity, and values have been trampled and disfigured by pure anti-Semitism and unrelenting hate and vitriol, where religious fundamentalists, recognized terror organizations, and the woke are able to create anarchy, unfettered hatred, and mangle, twist, and ignore the truth. When we all wake up in the morning with a pit in our stomachs, worried for the safety of our families, our community, there is a voice that shines bright, that offers a ray of hope, a voice that smashes down the lies, unwaveringly supports and vigorously defends the truth on a global stage. That voice is the voice of Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray is no stranger to this audience, yet I feel we need to just talk about the man himself, so you truly appreciate the depth and the privilege that we have tonight. So Douglas Murray is an author and journalist based in Britain. His first book came out in 2000 while he was only an undergraduate at Oxford. Since then, he has published 3 books on politics, history, and current affairs, as well as shorter works on free speech and defense. His latest publication, The War on the West, is an international bestseller. His previous book, The Madness of Crowd, was a bestseller and Book of the Year by The Times and The Sunday Times, and has been published in more than 20 languages across the globe. He's also cited by politicians worldwide. He's been a contributor to The Spectator since 2000 and has been associate editor at the magazine since 2012. He was regularly a contributor for numerous outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, The Times, The Sunday Times, The Sun, The Evening Standard, The New York Post, The Criterion. He's a regular contributor to National Review, Unheard, and The Free Press. A prolific debater, Murray has spoken on prominent platforms, including British and European parliaments and the White House. He appears often on top political debate programs, including BBC's Newsnight and Daily Politics, This Week, and Question Time. He's a regular contributor to Sky News, Fox News, and has appeared on some of the most listened to podcasts, including Joe Rogan's and Waking Up with Sam Harris. So now you really truly understand what we have with us in the room tonight. Now, Douglas is going to be very well matched this evening. We have someone who is equally fearless, eloquent, and not afraid to share his views. Howard Feldman is well known to this community, using his deep understanding on a broad range of issues and humor to give us insights and commentary whenever he can. He's a radio presenter extraordinaire by dawn, an author, writer, speaker, and marketer by day, and generally asleep by night. Thank you, Howard, for being out this late tonight and for facilitating what will be no doubt an insightful, incredible, and highly entertaining conversation. Thank you to the team at the SA Jewish Report, to Howard, Petter, Britt, Sandy, and Dylan, to our extended team, Felicity, Vicky, and Jody, for helping put this night together. It truly takes a village. And also, obviously, to the CSO, who are always there whenever we need them. Apologies to those who could not be with us. So apologies to those who could not be with us in the room tonight. If we could have had a hall with 5,000 people, I guarantee you we could have filled it. Competition was fierce, and those to the first who got there, sorry. But at least we got you online, so thank you for being here. Now, without further ado, I'd like to bring our speakers onto stage. Please help me welcome and give a warm welcome to Douglas Murray and Howard Feldman.
I can tell you they weren't clapping like that for me, that's for sure. So actually, in response to a post about this evening on X, we were talking about it outside, I got the following, and I want to read it because accuracy, of course, is irrelevant on X, but it doesn't matter. This is what somebody said. A genocidal Zionist, I'm going to assume that that's me, and an Islamophobe, I'm going to assume that that's you, but I don't mean to be offensive, they did, walk into a bar to have a conversation. It couldn't be more perfect. So I think to some extent we do sound like the beginning of a bad joke. But the reality is that we live in a world that if it wasn't so tragic and it wasn't so bizarre, it actually would be funny. I'm Howard Feldman, and I'm delighted to be in conversation with Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray has shown himself to be a friend of the Jewish people at a time when friends were scarce. He spoke up when others were silent. He stood up when others sat down. And more importantly, he showed up. Very, very soon after the October 7th invasion, he arrived at ground zero where it was literally the home of the physical war. And now, he has come to South Africa, where in fact, we are ground zero for the legal one. And for that, we are very, very grateful. The South African community, as I'm sure you have come to see, is one that is feeling alienated, that is feeling isolated, and a little perplexed at what is going on. Your desire or your ability to step into ground zero, into the places that actually need you most, is that courage, is that foolhardiness, or a little bit of both?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Howard. Thank you to the organizers, and thank you to all of you as well for showing up. I know there's a lot to do in Johannesburg of an evening, and I hear. But it's wonderful to see you all, and we don't take it for granted at all. So thanks to you, and it's very good to be back in South Africa. By the way, what you just read out from X or Twitter is a proof of what I said to you before, which is don't read Twitter. I always say it's
then what
like,
was I doing?
It's like going over to the maddest person in the street and asking what they think of your shirt. So why would you do it? Well, first of all, I don't know. I think the word courage is overused about writers. And, I sort of think courageous people are, firemen, soldiers, policemen, Writers are forever patting themselves on the back for their courage, and I don't notice firemen doing the same thing. So, no, I mean, it's a very important time in this country, obviously, because you are, as you said, I mean, you're one of the focal points of the world on this question and on the question of the legitimacy of Israel. I've been here for a few days, so I can't give a full estimation as everybody else in this room can, but I think what is being done by the government of this country is obscene. And somebody said to me, I was doing a conversation yesterday with a South African journalist, and we had differences of opinion. I said to him, if it is the case that the government of South Africa has sorted so many things out here, at which point there was a blackout, I think. Yeah. But if it's true that they've sorted everything out here, education, water, no outbreaks of cholera, and everything like that, then I suppose if they've decided to be the international arbiter of just war, you would have thought they'd have looked closer to home, where there's no shortage of places on this continent that they could have actually focused on, but they don't seem to have much interest in that. I think what has happened is that, shamefully, the government of your country has been bought. I will wait for the documentation, but I can say with some certainty that it's no coincidence that your foreign minister went straight to Tehran after the 7th of October. And whatever price the Iranians paid to get your government to insult the Jewish state and try to indict it, it won't be worth it, because this country has some moral capital, and that's being sold by your government, in my view. The term apartheid, for instance, should mean something, and every time your government sells that term for a place where there isn't apartheid, it diminishes the moral capital of this, the moral currency of this country. So, I never say to people how they should vote, but
we know how not to vote, right?
Well, I just say vote well.
Right. Yeah. So it's something we've always wondered, because, or certainly I have, is in your view, do you think that the government are useful idiots, and that's the positive option, or are they complicit in this delegitimization? Is it somewhat more nefarious, and are they siding with evil because they're choosing evil?
Well, I mean, by the way, there's one other category below useful idiots. Mm-hmm. But I'm your guest in South Africa, so
yeah, we're going to be
shouldn't
polite,
like to elaborate on that. I'll leave that thought with you. Well, for instance, if they do care about war crimes, they should go to Cape Town and arrest the members of Hamas who live there. They should, but of course it's cynical and disgraceful. There are any number of ways in which you can prove this, but I would observe, among other things, that they and the other voices in the international community who are smearing Israel, apart from having nothing to say about the far larger wars which have raged for years in the Middle East and elsewhere, as well as having nothing to say about them, I think that they just diminish all of these terms. They diminish them all. You do occasionally meet somebody, usually a student or something, who's been persuaded that a relatively minimal operation in Gaza to destroy Hamas is the worst war of their lifetime. And you can just say, well, okay, you don't know what else has been happening in the world. And you can also tell very, very swiftly where somebody is coming from on this by saying, if you think that there are too many civilian casualties, please tell me your strategy for getting the remaining 100 or more hostages back in a highly densely populated civilian area against a terrorist army government that is hiding behind its civilian populations and dresses as civilians. Like, okay, counterterrorism genius, give me your view. How would you do the operation? And if the answer is, I don't really know, or something, but that's not good enough. That's not good enough.
We even saw that comment, I think it was Blinken, who said Israel's #1 priority is safety of the civilians. And I thought, no, it isn't. No. Surely the #1 priority is getting the hostages back. Number 2 is destroying Hamas. And number 3 might be somewhere along the line, obviously trying to minimize civilian deaths, which obviously are regrettable and terrible and tragic. But I wouldn't have thought that's Israel's #1 responsibility.
No, and that's absurd. If somebody said to Mr. Blinken, America's #1 priority should be the protection of Iraqi civilians, or something, you say, why? The #1 priority of the American government is the protection of the American public. The #1 priority of the Israeli government has to be the protection of the Israeli public. Of course. That's why they're voted in. That's why people pay their taxes. That's why they're citizens.
So the comment that October 7th didn't start on October 7th, I think to some extent is absolutely right, because there's been, and you refer to it in your books, there's been a cultivation of an environment that allowed what we see today to be planted in fertile soil, where you have a situation and you have a tragic series of events that took place on that day. Actually, it really did start earlier. The event itself might be around that date, but the fact that you could have university students, you could have governments, you could have people in the streets of all the capitals supporting Hamas, it really must have started earlier. Take us through that.
Well, I was in New York on October the 7th, and got the same messages through on my phone as I'm sure all of you did on yours. And my first reaction was, I saw a friend in Tel Aviv sent a message about the rockets, and I thought, well, we're kind of used to that. And then, like everyone, I started to realize how much more serious and how unusual, unprecedented indeed it was. And I think that if there was one thing that immediately persuaded me of that, it was something that a lot of people also woke up to, which was the footage of Hamas going down the main street in Sderot and firing an RPG. And I've been to those streets many times, and rather randomly, about 10 years ago, opened a skateboard park in Sderot, which I've never done before or since. So it can't have gone well. But for a Jewish charity in the UK. And I sat in the bomb shelters of Sderot with the citizens in the past, but I never, in my wildest nightmares, imagined Hamas going house to house in Sderot. So the gravity of the situation started to dawn on me as it dawned on all of us, as it dawned on the citizens of Israel that day. The next day I went down to Times Square because there was a demonstration in Times Square which was, it was just anti-Israel. I mean, they were flying Palestinian flags, of course, and we all have to remember that these people, I said to a friend in Israel, they'll probably give us a day before it's, Israeli revenge.
Brutality.
What they love, the press love the Israel revenge story. What will the retaliation be? And they didn't actually give us a day. In Times Square, there were women waving signs celebrating the massacre that was actually still going on. So, I don't have much truck for the people who say, actually, all we're doing on these protests is demanding peace. Get your story straight. You say you want peace and you simultaneously call for intifada. choose. And if you've chosen war, then don't bleat and whine when you start a war and begin to lose it. There's no law of warfare that says you are allowed to go and murder innocent civilians in their homes, kidnap men, women, and children, take them from their homes, and then complain about any response. No, every single death from the start of this conflict is all at the doors of Hamas. Every single one. Palestinians and Israelis, every one. And the fact that so many people have been fooled, I sort of divide the people who I regard as opponents on this into two groups. The evil and the stupid. The evil are the ones who, and there are some in this country, there are some in America, there are some in every country, who support Hamas. That's what they want. They want Hamas to win. I say, okay, fine, I want Israel to win. We'll see who wins. But, that's what they want. They support to give succor to the leaders of Hamas as they say they want to do October 7th again and again. Okay, those people have chosen their side. I think it's a side of utter depravity and evil, but they've chosen their side. And very little is going to persuade them otherwise. The stupid, or the easily misled, you might say, if you were being politically correct about it, are people who just have been horribly, horribly misled by, a generation of propaganda. And you can get that in the Palestinian areas, you can get that in the West, you can get that especially on an American college campus where, these students' parents remortgage their house to send their kids away to college where they become stupider and evil. And it's a very bad deal. And these are people who just genuinely, and I meet them all the time, who genuinely don't know the facts. I was being interviewed yesterday by a South African journalist, and I thought it would be a sort of perfectly pleasant interview, but I was wrong. The second half was pleasant when we talked about the world. The first half, when she wanted to try to maul me on Israel, was more hand-to-hand combat than I think she expected, and I wasn't terribly surprised when I discovered afterwards that she used to work for Al Jazeera. But anyway, it was very interesting. I said to her at one point in the interview, she said she'd lived in the Middle East. She wouldn't tell me where, and that's because it was Doha. I know the region. Oh, yeah, you can see a lot from Doha. You're right in the heart of it there. But, we had this, one of the many perfectly enjoyable, from my point of view, exchanges we had, when she referred to Gaza as being a concentration camp. Yeah. And I looked at her, I said, come on. I said, have you been to Gaza? She said yes, although she wouldn't tell me when. And I started to suspect the answer was actually no. But anyway, and I said, she said, well, it's a population that's completely locked in. And I said, by whom? By Israel. And who? Who? Israel at least used to have workers coming in every day from Gaza, and the international community, as you know, was pushing them to get more workers in until the 7th. And by the way, I've seen on the bodies, the maps from the bodies of the dead terrorists who had pinpointed exactly which houses to go to kill people. I've got them on my phone. There's a guy from the Knesset who lives in Hague, which is a town some of you will know. It's about the furthest from the Gaza border that the terrorists got on the day. And the map of one of the dead terrorists had on them had his house on the map. And that was the first location the terrorists wanted to get. They wanted to get a member of the Knesset. And then there were the synagogues and the schools, the kindergartens. Okay, now how did they know that information? Because of workers from Gaza. Great. So tell any of those people to hire people from Gaza in the future. But I said to this journalist, I said, who else then? If you think that it's enclosed, who else? She didn't know. said, how about Egypt? How about the border with Egypt? The border of Egypt seemed to come as a surprise to her. And that's an informed journalist. Imagine what these college kids and others know. I remember, it was a rather cruel example, but many years ago, my late friend Christopher Hitchens was on a show with Charlton Heston at the time of Gulf War I, and memorably they were on different sides on the war. Christopher at that point was anti the Iraq War, and Charlton Heston was very for it. And Christopher said to Charlton Heston, name 2 countries that border the country you want to invade. And Charlton Heston had a bad moment. And after a bit of struggling said Bahrain. Christopher said, well, that's an island. So, but I don't believe that the college students and others who make such a fetish of the Israel-Palestinian dispute know anything about this.
Well, it was actually interesting. I was on a debate also on TV here, on television here, with the Deputy Minister of Justice, and he had absolutely no idea that there was this United Nations agreement or a proposal in 1948 or 1947 actually to allow Palestinians to have a state. He was quite shocked by it. This is the Deputy Minister of Justice here in South Africa.
Well, that's a very important point because, as you know, the people who say this didn't start on October the 7th, I always say to them, okay, what start date do you
pick
give
a
it?
date.
Pick a date. Some of them say 1948. I said, okay, do you want to go earlier? Let's do 2000 BC. How early do you want to start? And what they really mean is, it all started when Israel was created. And I say to those people, okay, we're done. That's fine. You don't believe the Jews have a right to a single state in the world? Fine, you're a racist, you're an anti-Semite. Go away. I have no, at least they've said what they are, knowingly or not. They've revealed who they are. But, the rest of the mouthwash you hear from these people, and of course you now also get the one where they say that Israel will only create more terrorists by killing terrorists. Which is like, well, okay, that means that when you're attacked by terrorists, all you can do is sit back and take it. And does anyone know any country in the world that would do that? Even Sweden would be up in arms if,
They wouldn't be so happy.
Everyone would be.
South Africa, certainly in early 2000s, introduced at the Durban conference, they managed to associate the word Zionism with apartheid, and of course that was very successful. Now we're seeing South Africa pushing the genocide word to be associated with Israel. That is obviously moving the needle all towards complete delegitimization of the state. How do we push back? How do we reclaim ownership or, in fact, a little bit of semblance of truth? You spoke about the word apartheid being totally diluted. The word genocide is going in the same direction. Everything is really, because we talk in hyperbole, and it just seems to be accepted.
Even the most minimal conflicts in Gaza in the past, by comparison with this one, Operation Cast Lead, Operation Defensive Shield, they said there was a genocide in Gaza each of these times. Again, they can never get their story straight. At the moment, they're saying most of the casualties are young people, because the overwhelming majority of the Gazan population is under the age of 30, an unusually high proportion. And again, okay, you can choose. Either you have a disproportionately young, booming population in Gaza, or there's been genocide for the last 16 years.
Yeah.
Again, it's like peace or intifada. Choose. And no, they've watered this down for years, but you're so right to focus on Durban. The Durban conference was definitely one of the things that historians will put down as a moment where a form of moral rot was introduced into the international system. It was everything. The fact that 9/11 happened just afterwards was very clarifying for a lot of people because, you had at the Durban conference every thug and despot on the planet welcomed, and every democracy, every liberal democracy defamed. I mean, it was just an endless rah-rah for, Robert Mugabe and Fidel Castro, and a smearing of the United States and Israel. And I mean, at the time, it was so obscene that a lot of us thought it was laughable. I mean, my friend Mark Stein wrote a column on the Durban conference where he said, the African leaders were in agreement on everything except one thing, which was whether the reparations should be paid direct into their Swiss bank accounts or not. Some people were for direct payment, some thought they should launder it that way.
Yeah, I think the South African way is we put it in our couches, don't we? If we ask our president, that's kind of the way we do things around here.
But yes, I mean, that was obscene. But it started, part of this process, although, as you know, I mean, it went back earlier, in 1975, when the infamous Zionism is Racism resolution was passed at the UN. I saw in New York the other month before leaving a friend, Norman Podhoretz, who was one of the people who wrote Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the great Democrat senator's amazing riposte to that grotesque resolution. But, it was the same thing back then. Who was it who proposed the Zionism is Racism resolution? Idi Amin. Famous defender of human rights.
Yeah.
A man who I've said before, but he's responsible for my only amusing copy editing error, which was that I wrote in a book about him some years ago in passing. I mentioned him, said the wife-eater Idi Amin. My copy editor said, "I think you've left out a B." And I said, "Oh no, no. Idi Amin proposes this resolution, and after it passes, a party is thrown at the UN by which moral pillar but Kurt Waldheim, formerly of the SS. So, at times like that, we realize that the world can be made mad about Israel, and if it can be made mad, it can also be injected with a dose of sanity, which is something I think everybody who cares about the truth should do.
The question around sanity is one that bothers me tremendously, because here in South Africa, we see perfectly sane people, seemingly intelligent people, on every other issue, rational, logical, interrogative. They'll go through a process until it's Israel. And then suddenly, they completely lose their mind.
And why do you think that is?
Well, I don't want to say anti-Semitism, but I really don't know why that is. Because you've got these intellectuals here in South Africa who just cannot. There's one subject that they're completely irrational about, and whether it is because they've aligned with what they perceive as a left woke liberal script that they have to follow. And maybe that's what it is. But it's very concerning because, I get it all the time. Howard, you've lost your mind. I used to have so much respect for you. No, they didn't. They just didn't hear. They just didn't want me to talk about one particular subject. On all other subjects, I was okay. But in fact, the corollary of that is also true, because they are respect-worthy in many subjects, but not Israel.
Well, there's various explanations for that, and I think it differs from country to country. I genuinely do think that there are some people, particularly young people, who've been miseducated into an idea, for instance, that the whole world fits a paradigm that really, unfortunately, has sort of flown out from American college campuses, which took some lessons from this country, of course. And that essentially boils down to that the world can be divided into oppressor and oppressed, colonizer and colonized, victim, victimizer. And in some ways it's sort of understandable, because if you don't know anything, you're looking for a paradigm of the world that makes sense in a very complex world. And this one is straightforward. Let's just go to every situation and find out who's the oppressor. And probably, I spoke to a friend who lived through from the moment of long before the foundation of the state, but was there at the foundation of the state in 48. And I said to him shortly before his death, when was it that it changed? And he said he was of the left, and he said, well, I think it was 1967 and then 1973. He said they didn't like it when we won. You know, when Israel was beleaguered, when Israel was struggling at the beginning of the state, some of the left were on their side. And then the minute that they can look after themselves and demonstrate that, some of those bits of the left ran away. Well, what's that about?
Well, we've got a similar story playing out now, don't we? Where many people who were living in the Gaza envelope, were people who associated very strongly with the left, who were promoting peace, who were very actively living that life. And then they, unfortunately, were on the front lines. To add insult to injury, they actually have been abandoned by their, the feminists, their sister movements, the liberal ideologies, supporters who just turned their backs on them.
Well, I've sort of been living in Israel since October and making what I sometimes jokingly refer to as non-Jewish aliyah, which is the rabbis are working on around the clock in shifts. But it happens, I live in Tel Aviv with a lot of residents of Kiryat Shimona, who, of course, have been out of their houses since the 7th of October. This is a significant-sized town. In all, by the way, in all of the coverage in the international press, we read so much about the Palestinian refugees. You never hear talk of the Israeli refugees. Never. No one seems to care about the tens of thousands of Israeli families from the south and the north who have not been allowed to return to their homes. It should be regarded as an outrage. But, because the Israeli government looks after its refugees, calls them internally displaced people, and Hamas positively thrives on anyone they can call a refugee, maybe that's one of the reasons why. But anyway, I mention this because I've very often come across people in my time in Israel who, increasingly as the months have gone on, there will be more delegations from abroad, and sometimes I meet with them, and very often I find, particularly from America, often women who will say to me, I don't understand what's happened. Like, I was there for Me Too, I was there for BLM, and no one was there for me. And, I feel very sorry for these people, but, I say to them, this is a fast learning curve. It's not reciprocal, it turns out.
So what is the reason for that?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. One, by the way, it goes back to what you were saying about the peace people in the South. It's very hard for people to, you understand this in this audience, but it's very hard for a lot of people outside of Israel to understand the thinking of some of the people in these kibbutz. One of the first massacre sites I went around was the ruins of Nir Oz, kibbutz right by the border, very, very brutally attacked. And, in the burned out houses, you can literally see, Peace Now stickers on what remains of their refrigerators. And there are some cases that have become famous, like a woman from one of the communities there who was in her 70s, who every week used to drive children from the Gaza to hospitals inside Israel for treatment. And by the way, lots of the Israeli hospitals that look after people with serious cancer treatments and things, lots of them, like half of the patients still are Gazans. They're still looking after people that they were looking after on the 7th. But, that woman was finally, her body was finally found burnt in her home. And I say to people sometimes in the West, just, if you think you want peace more than these people did, you're kidding yourself. These people not only wanted peace, they dreamt of peace, and they tried in their own way to enact peace by working with Palestinians, by befriending Palestinians, by hiring Palestinians, by doing their bit as they saw it. And tell me that you cared about peace more than them. And it's the same with the young people at the Nova Festival. I would say, everyone at that party, which anyone in this country of that age would have been at, or would have known people at, every single person at that party, every young man and woman, dreamt of the day they could dance with their Palestinian neighbors. Dreamt of it. And in the early morning saw hell open. And so when people say things like, I'm dreaming of peace in the Middle East, I say, well, you know what? Dream on. And good luck. Because these people could no longer afford to dream the dream you're treating yourself to. They woke up. And my view is that on October the 7th, all of Israel woke up. It's in some ways tragic, of course, but also it proved to be not just unifying, but clarifying for the country. Left, right, it doesn't matter. Politics always comes back, but the politics has been put to one side because everybody, there's just nobody who thinks they can live beside Hamas. They just don't. And I've told this story before, but there was a man I interviewed in a hospital in Tel Aviv who was from one of the kibbutz, and he had been in his safe room. As you know, the safe rooms didn't lock because people didn't expect anything other than rockets. And, they heard the gunfire. He went into the safe room with his wife, son, and daughter, and eventually the terrorists set fire to the house in order to smoke them out. And they were there for a very long time and started to suffocate. And he said we had the choice of, burning to death or running out of the house and being shot. And in the end, they decided as an interim measure to open the vent, the sort of window that some of the safe rooms had. And Hamas, the terrorists, noticed, and they looked through, and then they threw a grenade in, which killed his wife and wounded his son. And then they put a Kalashnikov through the window and shot his son through both sides of his chest, and he bled out in front of his sister and father. And his father, who also lost his legs, said to me in the hospital, he said, I'll never forget it. He said, all my life I've been of the left. All my life, Douglas. And he said, I want nothing but potato fields from here to the Mediterranean. We can't live with these people. Now, tell me that anyone outside of Israel who says they're pro-peace was more pro-peace than that man. And tell me that you dare to tell people like him that they're wrong in knowing what they can and cannot live right beside.
I spoke with Keith Isaacson, who is in charge of the security in the area, and the question that I asked him was, what do you do to make people feel safe to come back to the area? And his answer, I thought, was very, very profound, in that he said, we remove the word feeling. We don't make them feel safe. They felt safe. We make them safe. And the statement, I thought, weighed so heavily upon him that he had this burden of responsibility. And that is something, certainly, that I felt, and I've only been to Israel once. Since then, you in fact went very, very soon afterwards, where it was much more immediate. It was already, when we were there, it was a little bit of a distance time-wise, although horrific as it was, when you see things lying on a patio and you see flip-flops and kids' toys, it really, really, you understand what went on there. But this idea that people will not just feel safe, be safe. Do you think the same people can ever move back there? Do you think that that's part of the healing? The other issue was at Kfar Aza, where they said, we don't know if we should be knocking down all of these burnt-out houses because nobody wants to live in Auschwitz. We want to live again. How do they move forward?
I think that's going to be a case-by-case in some ways. I mean, I'm always interested in, as well as like extraordinary acts of heroism that go on and have gone on every day since the 7th and on the 7th. I'm also interested in the small acts of courage, you know. There was a woman who I used to see every morning for breakfast who had been taken out of her home on the 7th. She lived in Sderot, and she heard the terrorists going past her house, and for some weeks people had started going back to Sderot. This is earlier this year, and she said to me one day, I just can't do it, and she said, maybe I'm going to try today, maybe you'll see me back tomorrow, and she was back, and you know, and then one week she said, I think I can do it. She lives on the ground floor alone, you know, and she did it, you know, and she's back in her home.
And that is heroism.
Heroism.
Because can you imagine the courage?
Quiet, unacknowledged courage, and there's a lot of that. The people in the north can't go home because of the rocket fire. I've been up there a lot, and there's a lot more activity than anyone's admitting. And there's the possibility of an imminent war with Hezbollah.
I think more than a possibility.
It
seems to be the worst kept secret in the world. When you know, Israel's talking about it as though it's inevitable.
Well, by the way, let me just finish on the south for a moment. I think people will move back, but it will be different. And when people say what must Israel do in this war, I say there's several aims. One is to destroy Hamas. One is to get the hostages back. But the most overriding, in a way, is Israel has to reassert its military and intelligence deterrent. There was in recent years, in particular, what I've sometimes called the Fowderization of Israel. The perception that the sort of, you know, some people said, you know, you can't sneeze in the Gaza without us knowing, that sort of thing. It was very hubristic. But I think most of us thought that was true.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that must absolutely be done, it is, as you say, that it must not just feel safe, it must be safe. And we'll see what that looks like in the south. In the north, it's extraordinary. I mean, as everybody here knows, but a lot of people outside don't, it's 160,000 missiles, high grade, much better than what Hamas had. They're pointed at Israel. By the way, when people like to talk about international law and so on, I'm like, well, I covered the 2006 Lebanon war, and I remember very well the resolution 1701, which finished that war, which reassured the Israelis that Hezbollah would not be stockpiling munitions on its borders. And guess what? The international community picks and chooses which resolutions it obeys, because the international community has not obeyed 1701 at all. And when I was up in the north the other month, I was at a place called Metula, which is right on the border. You've got Hezbollah on three sides, and you can see the Hezbollah outposts. You can see them looking at you. And I saw some footage that they'd recorded a couple of days before, the UN peacekeeping vehicles coming out of their base. Hezbollah fires a barrage of rockets into Israel. The UN peacekeeping troops do a U-turn and go back into their base. Well done. Fantastic peacekeeping. Well done, guys. If that's the UN's idea of peacekeeping, like, no wonder that we were in this situation. And why should anyone blame the Israelis for having to do the job the international community said they would do and didn't do? Yes, I mean, I've spoken to people who say there's maybe a 30% chance, 30, of some resolution to this. But I don't see it. I think of all of these families in places like Metula, places like Kiryat Shimona, they have to be allowed to go back to their homes. It's extremely hard where they are. I've been in Kiryat Shimon, when the rockets go off, and they, you hear boom, boom, and then there's a pause, and then the siren goes.
Wow.
Okay, there's not even time for the siren to pick it up. So you can't live under these situations, of course not. So all of those missiles have to go, and my view is that if the international community can't obey its own rules, then Israel, or Israel and its allies, must take those missiles out themselves. And if people say, how could you do that? It'd be because you didn't do your job. Like if the South African government wants to do everything it can to stop a war in the north, by all means get an international coalition to go up and ask Hezbollah to take their 160,000 missiles away. Good luck.
So, I mean, on that note, I found it quite interesting or perplexing that it's very clear that Iran is behind Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, South Africa, allegedly. But never mind.
Allegedly and really.
It's clear that Iran doesn't want a direct war. So they're using all of these proxies. Why is there respect for Iran? Surely, if the one thing that Iran doesn't want, primarily also because maybe it'll unsettle things domestically where they do have pressure from their own people, why is everybody standing back and not drawing Iran directly into this conflict?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I mean, Iran is trying to do everything it can. I mean, Yemen being a good example. I mean, a British ship sank the other day after it had been rocketed by Houthis Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen. By the way, what do we hear the next week on the streets of London but these people chanting at the anti-Israel protests, Yemen, Yemen, make us proud, turn another ship around. I cannot understand why the police do not just go in and arrest every single one of those people. That's praising terrorism. Terrorists who are attacking British vessels. It's also treason, but let me put that to one side. Iran is doing everything it can in the region with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with their armies in Syria, which fortunately is a completely free operating area, and in Yemen, and yes, I mean, this war will not be over, or it will not be over with an Israeli victory, with Iran still standing strong, is my view. And I think that all the main politicians in Israel know that. I interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu the other week and put this to him, and I said, this war doesn't end if Iran's revolutionary Islamic government remains standing. And he said, you may be right. I said, well, does anyone agree with you? He said, I agree with me. So I mean, he knows that. I think that all the opposition leaders and other people, I mean, one of the things that nobody outside of Israel who's not connected to Israel, one of the things nobody understands is every leader in Israel, left, center, right, they'd all be doing this.
Oh, there's no question. They'd all be doing the same thing.
So there's always this stupid debate like, oh, maybe Netanyahu could be replaced. Everyone would do this. What else can you do?
Was there a time during this conflict that you were concerned that it could go the wrong way for Israel?
No. No, not at all. And I'll tell you why, because I've seen them in action, and I've seen the unity in the country. It's an extraordinary thing, by the way. It's almost like something from biblical times, that almost like the peoples are so fractured, and they've lost sight of where they are, where they need to go, what they need to do. And October the 7th united the country. They know what they need to do. And that's an unusual unity, but it's a unity which can do anything. And I tell you why I have no doubt about it as well, apart from the fact, as I say, that everybody in Israel knows you can't live with another October the 7th on your doorstep, imminent. The other reason I know is because of the spirit of the young men and women of the IDF. They are remarkable people, absolutely remarkable. And some people here may have relatives. If so, you in the
don't
army.
say it out loud.
Don't say it out loud.
But keep your hands right down, please.
But I can tell you, for those of you who do, you should be deeply, deeply proud. These are remarkable men and women. And, there was a poll when I was in Ukraine covering conflict in 22. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a poll in the American papers asking asking all Americans what they would do if their country was invaded, as Ukraine had just been invaded. And only just about a majority of Americans said that they would stay and fight.
That's fascinating.
Just a majority.
What did the others say? They'd do a dance on TikTok.
I mean, well, I said in my New York Post column, I said, assuming that it isn't Canada doing the invading, which is, I'd like to think, one of the sure things in international relations, assuming Canada isn't doing the invading, they'd all hot-foot it to Canada, presumably. But it was a very, very disturbing poll because a majority just of Republicans said that they would stay and fight. A minority of Democrats, I think 48%, said that they'd stay and fight. Earlier this year, the British Defense Secretary said that if the Ukraine war continues to go badly for the Ukrainians and well for the Russians, and if the Russians are emboldened to invade a NATO state, that we might have to have conscription in the UK. And there was a poll asking young British people whether they would fight for their country, and a minority said they would. Now, I add a proviso here. The most famous debate at my old university at Oxford was in 1934, when there was a vote on this house would not fight for king and country, and it's still quite a famous debate because the house voted that they wouldn't fight for king and country. And you could say that there were some understandable reasons. These were the children of the lost generation of the First World War, and none of them wanted war for sure. But anyhow, all of the newspapers were filled with columns by people like me fulminating about the weak younger generation and so on. And of course, the men, it was all men, but the men who voted that way in 1934, 5 years later, were signed up. So you can never tell, but I mention these two examples because, first of all, by the way, there's a reason why young Americans and British people might not want to fight for their country. They've been told for a generation their country's rotten.
Yeah.
Like, why would you...
And to blame for all the ills
to blame
of the
for all
world.
the ills of the world, and, nothing isn't our fault, and everything that isn't ours is wonderful, and, but I mean, they should be so lucky in Britain, America, South Africa, or anywhere else to have a young generation like those in Israel, because they've all stepped up. They've stepped up, and they're extraordinary, and they do the most amazing things with such determination, never with glee. They're not happy about what they have to do, but they know it's something they have to do. And, I was very moved some time ago speaking to a man in Tel Aviv who'd fought in 67 and 73, and he said to me, I owe the younger generation an apology. He said, I thought that they were weak. He said, I thought they were weak. I thought they spent all their time on TikTok and Instagram. I thought that they wanted to party in Tel Aviv all the time. And he said, I was wrong. They've been magnificent.
Incredible. And it's across the board.
Across the board.
It's so interesting. It's from religious to non-religious.
Oh, I mean, absolutely.
Which
solves that. I mean, not complete solve, but I mean, the number of religious who have been signing up, which, by the way, was always a question I had.
Yes.
I always had that question when I was in Israel. Was like, what would the ultra-Orthodox who don't want to fight in the army do if an invasion happened?
Well, they're there.
They're starting to step up.
Yeah,
and some of the best combat units as well. And, you meet them all. I mean, if you go into Gaza with the IDF, you will meet ultra-religious, you'll meet secular, liberal, Tel Aviv party people, Doesn't matter. It's everyone, you know. And no, they're making their country and their people proud.
Before we go to questions, I just have to ask you this, is how on earth did you get involved in all of this? What did you do to deserve this kind of, to take on anti-Semitism when you're not Jewish? I don't know.
Well, I was brought up to know right from wrong, which I think is an important one. I was also, I've never minded if my own opinion was not the most popular. My own opinion is enough for me. I don't mind, and it's nice when people agree, but it's not something I seek. Otherwise, I'd be on TikTok doing dances.
Doesn't happen often.
And I also, I said this to a lady I was speaking to earlier, but I also, some years ago when I was at a conference in America, and my friend Melanie Phillips, a British writer, was standing nearby as a gentleman said to me, "I don't understand what motivates you." And I'm British, and so you don't, what do you do when someone says that, except for squirm? And I was squirming, and Melanie leapt in and said, "Douglas has a very low tolerance threshold for lies." And I thought that was great, and I said, "I'm going to steal that." But it is sort of true. I mean, one of the things, it's not the only thing that motivates me as a writer and journalist, but one of the things that motivates me is untruths. The great poet W.H. Auden said at the end of the 30s, he said, "All I have is a voice to undo the folded lie." And I think that's all one has as a writer, is a voice to undo the folded lie. And when I first went to Israel, I was pretty aware of whose side I was on, because I noticed that the people who hated Israel were the same people who hated Britain, were the same people who hated America. There's a very clear, I can completely predict somebody's politics if they're anti-Israel. I mean, nobody who's anti-Israel also loves America. Right? They just don't. They do Israel first. And they literally take the view of the Ayatollah, that Israel's the little Satan, America's the great Satan, and Britain is a cute medium-sized Satan. But they take that view. But I knew that they were full of it, and then when I went to Israel for the first time, I was really struck by.
When was that? When did you go?
The first time was in 2006 during the war, during the Lebanon War. And one of the things that absolutely knocked me flat was the disconnect between what I was seeing with my own eyes and what was being reported in the media. I mean, and it was just, I've experienced similar things in other conflict zones and so on, but never to this extent. I remember, so much of the current war is just like Groundhog Day or horribly familiar, And I think, by the way, one of the things about this war is Israel cannot fight a Gaza war every 2 to 3 years and a Lebanon war every 15 to 20 years. It's totally unacceptable. No state should accept it. If you look at what Begin was doing in the 80s, Operation Free Galilee, to stop rockets from Lebanon hitting the Galilee, it's the same thing now. But in 2006, it was the same thing again. It was another Hezbollah cycle. And I remember I was in a hospital in the town of Sfat as it was being shelled, because Hezbollah, foolish French journalist, had broadcast the location that a missile had landed, which is one of the very, very few things you're not meant to do in a war zone, because it gives people the direct trajectory of fire. She had said that the hospital had been hit, and so then Hezbollah keep firing at the hospital. Anyway, I just was amazed that, no editor in Britain seemed to be interested. It was, and I looked at the next day's newspapers, and it was all about what Israel was doing, and there just was no interest. It was like, did the woman I saw holding her baby in the hospital not matter? Do you not care?
I think the answer is yes, they don't care.
Well, they it's, the old cynical saying, if it's Jews, it's news. It's there is something in it. I mean, I think there are very, very deep things at play there. It's not just anti-Semitism, it's also this deep, you see it in some of the media, they are so desperate for Israel to commit war crimes. Like they desperately want to be able to accuse the Israelis. And I think, there's a great writer who I wish was more read, Vasily Grossman, a great Jewish Russian writer of the mid-20th century. He reported from Stalingrad and from Treblinka. He was the first journalist in Treblinka. And his great novel of the 20th century, Life and Fate, has a bit in the middle where he writes about the nature of anti-Semitism. And it's 3 pages. It's all anyone needs to know about anti-Semitism. He does everything in 3 pages. And one of the things he says is he says it's something that you can hear in the Academy of Sciences and in the games children play in the yard. But this is the important insight. He says, everywhere, it's a mirror of the accuser. He says, tell me what you accuse the Jews of, I'll tell you what you're guilty of.
It is so applicable today.
It's so applicable. Like, why do Europeans, why do Germans desperately want the Israelis to be committing war crimes? Because then they can go, everyone's done it. That's a very deep psychosis right there. Tell me that the Germans aren't thinking that, and the Europeans and others. Of course. And of course they blame the Israelis, so I'll finish on this, but I mean, they blame the Israelis, they blame the Jews every single way you move. There's a move in chess, or there's a position in chess that I'm told by clever friends who play chess, I just lose immediately. But there's a move, I'm told, called a Zugzwang.
Sounds very aggressive.
It's a Zugzwang. Push-pull.
Right.
But and it's that you have to move your piece, one of your pieces, that every move you make will make your situation worse. And, I always say to people, it is not just cruel and racist, but just historically wicked to keep putting the Jewish people in Zugzwang. To say you have got to assimilate. You mustn't assimilate. They're trying to assimilate. You must be rich. You can't be rich. You can't be poor. These stateless people, these people who drift around, these people with a state. All of this is a cruel Zugzwang on the Jewish people, and it's been going on for centuries. And, I always say one of the ways you can tell that somebody hasn't thought about anti-Semitism is when they say things like, that is why we must eradicate anti-Semitism forever. You go, yeah? You think?
Yeah. We've been doing it for many thousands of years, and we're not there yet.
Well, the greatest thing about it, sorry to be positive about it, the greatest thing is that all the people who've tried to do that, the Jewish people, from Pharaoh to Hitler, have lost.
We're going to take some questions, but I'm going to have to, unfortunately, be quite unpleasant about this, if need be, because we would love questions, but we actually don't want 10 minutes and then no question, if you don't mind. So if you could ask questions, but actually ask the question, that would be really, really awesome. So we do have some roaming mics. If we could get some, it's hard for us to see up here.
Maybe just leave the lady.
Yeah, we'll leave it to you guys to find people. There's a question there. Maybe start there.
Hi, my name's Robin Shapiro. I'm also a journalist, huge admirer of your work.
His work or my work?
Both.
Oh, both. Okay. No, I just wanted to clarify. Yeah.
Firstly, I just want to say thank you for being such a huge friend to the Jewish community, for giving us the courage to stand up for ourselves. In that vein, as the South African Jewish community, what would you advise us to do as a community to deal with a government that is clearly anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist, anti-Israel? What can we do if we are still in the country to continue to stand up for ourselves and for fighting the fight in South Africa?
That's extremely hard because I think it's very hard to give advice to people when you don't fully know their situation or what the consequences of your situation will be. Look, if I was you, I'd make Aliyah, but that's but
Oh my word, he's employed by the Zionist Federation.
no, but the Jewish what's the fund? Yeah, the one that Sharansky used to run. Yeah. No, I mean that's a perpetual problem as well, isn't it? I mean, I remember when the Paris attacks happened a few years ago. Netanyahu came to Paris, and some of the dead were buried in Israel, and there was such in the Jewish community because they were like, on the one hand, yes, and on the other hand, we're trying to prove we're French, and we are, and so I understand that whole, again, the push-pull of that. All I would say is if you're going to stay in South Africa, then it is your home as much as anyone else's, and that means you don't put up with anything more than anyone else would put up with. And, you know, I'm always a little bit bewildered by Jews in the diaspora, particularly in Britain, which I know best, by the sort of way in which people do put up with things that no other community would. Like, I always say to my London friends, you know, like, if there was a march every Saturday, you know, in which even some people were calling for the eradication of all black people, like, do you think the next march would happen? Do you think it would be bigger in size or smaller? And if it was bigger, wouldn't you want to say something about that? And yet, we've sort of got used to it in the UK. The counter-terrorism advisor for the UK government just said last week that London's a no-go zone for Jews on Saturdays, which it is. It is. I know, and I don't say that myself or from any other authority other than my Jewish friends in London who say I cannot go into London with my children on Saturday. Now, how did it come to this? And of course, some of it's a numbers game, but some of it also is a noise game. I mean, my view is that most normal governments, so I don't know if we're speaking on the same terrain,
Yeah.
but most normal governments do, you know, give in to pressure, or at least can be influenced. And if you look at what some of the most anti-Israel people do, they are highly coordinated, they're very noisy, they have the advantage, the temporary advantage of being willing to lie, including lie about their feelings. You know, we're so upset about our brothers in Gaza. You go, come on, you're not at all. You were silent during Syria. You know, you're hypocrites at best. But I don't know, apart from a sort of fear of putting the head above the parapet, why there's so comparatively little pushback.
Because it is about the fear of putting our heads above the parapet. And I think that has to change. I think just to add to that, if Cyril Ramaphosa doesn't like it, he can go. If Naledi Pandor doesn't like it, she's got a home in Iran. Go. Why are we so afraid to stand up and say what is right and what isn't?
Yes.
We've got a fantastic constitution. Our rights are enshrined in it. Right. We need to call out what's right and what's wrong. Yeah, and I think the fear of it, I get, because we do come from the generations of post-Holocaust where survivors who were afraid, and then there was the apartheid era, which was a very dangerous time for many people. But the reality is that we've got a voice, we've got strength, we've got intelligence, and we need to actually acknowledge what we have and not be afraid to say so.
Exactly. Well said.
Sorry, another question wasn't at me, but it's there's a question over here.
Howard, lest you feel left out, I'll address this to both of you. As a pair that are on the front lines, there are still many, many people that are denying the events of the 7th. What are your feelings about the way the Israeli government has handled the holding back of images, videos, proof?
This is a very, very difficult question.
I think it was for you, that question. I think he wanted that question for you. It wasn't for me, right? Yeah.
Look, this is a very difficult question, and I have to say, I've gone around and round it for months. I know people in Israel and outside of Israel who feel very strongly that all of the footage should have been released. I know people who feel very strongly to the contrary, and there are good arguments on both sides. The argument for releasing it is that the world needed to see, and they say, well, we get these horror videos from Gaza, so why didn't we show our horror videos? The argument against is very powerful in my view, and is where I tilt, which is firstly that some of the families don't want it to be seen, and I respect their wishes above anyone else's. The version of the 47-minute video that I saw shortly after the massacre, already a couple of the things were taken out for the next viewings because the families decided they just couldn't, and that, I think that has to be respected. I'm very torn about it because I also think that it's things people shouldn't see, and they shouldn't be used as tit for tat social media point scoring. I also, by the way, I said after I saw the video and after I saw the footage and things in Israel, I said that I thought that one of the arguments against releasing all the footage was that the people who are going to lie anyway. I mean, we're dealing with the kinds of people who would use a bit of doctored imagery from a plane above Auschwitz to claim the Holocaust didn't happen. These are the kind of sickos who would pore over this footage and say, oh, you see the shadow of the axe on the wall doesn't correlate. They'll do this. And I sort of think, why would anyone allow these awful images of people in the last moments of their lives be used like that? But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, it's genuinely a question I find very difficult to answer because there's just very compelling arguments on both sides. But I think in general it shows something extraordinarily sick about our societies, that people demand to see. I mean, it's a bit gruesome, but bear with me for a second. I mean, there's a guy in the UK who's a sort of sicko of that kind who actually saw the film and immediately afterwards did a sort of film review of it, in which he said, well, you don't actually see any women being raped. Like, wow. You want a better video, And there was this extraordinary moment, actually, when that was at its height in about late November, early December maybe. It was before the New York Times did its piece, which then all these sickos said was propaganda as well. And one thing the New York Times is unlikely to do is pro-Israel propaganda. But when that was all going on, I happened to be at a reunion of the Nova survivors and interviewed these remarkable three men who were Druze Israelis, who had been among the caterers at the party. They had a catering firm, and one of the cousins had been persuaded to stay back later from returning home to America to help provide food at the party. And they are remarkable men, and they could hear, they saved a lot of people's lives, and they could hear the Arabic and understand it, that Hamas, and the Palestinian citizens who just came in with Hamas, who were pointing to, I've seen plenty of footage of that, they were pointing to people when they saw them still alive in cars so that the terrorists could come and kill them. These were the citizens of Gaza. I said to one of these men, it was an awful, awful thing to say, but this was on everyone's mind, the rape denial. There had been no rape, no. And I felt terrible, but I said to one of these extraordinary Druze men, I said, I have to ask you, did you see, because they'd heard Hamas saying, should we take this one or kill her now? Like they were, and they saw terrible things. I said to one of them, I said, can I just ask, because it's on everyone's mind, did you actually see them rape any of the girls? And he said, no, I only saw them shooting one of them in the vagina. And I just thought, what have we come to? That the world demands like live footage of these atrocities, like screw the people like that. I think it's disgusting. And my own view is that, I don't go on something if there's a denier of the atrocities. I don't go on things with Holocaust deniers. I don't go on with those sorts of people. I think it reveals a sickness in the soul of an individual to, why don't they contend with it? That's my big question. What is it that's making you want to deny it? And the answer is, it's because it's your side. And you want not to have to contend with it, because if you had to contend with it, you'd realize that you were on the side of barbarism. And maybe you couldn't cope with that.
Thanks, Hal. They asked me to stand up when I was asking the question. In case it's not clear, I am standing. Douglas, coming back to the war. At what stage, under what circumstances, will Israel be able to declare victory? Do you believe we'll get there? And if so, what will post-war Gaza look like? Thank you.
It's a very good question. It's a very difficult one. Again, I think the war, there's various ways in which the war could be over. The war could be over tomorrow, of course, if Hamas gave back the hostages. Something that I hear from no protester on the streets. I think one way it would be over is if Israel declares all the major leadership of Hamas to be dead or surrendered. In one way, it's most important that Sinwar is dead or captured. I'd like to see him captured and tried. But if he's killed, he's killed. But he's the face of the 7th, and that would do a lot, I think, to reassure the Israeli public that they'd got him. What Gaza will look like after the war is way beyond my imagination. I just don't know, because there is a plan, of course. The Prime Minister's office in Israel put it out the other week. I think it has to be a regional coalition of countries, but I understand that other countries in the region might not want to put money into Gaza only for it to be flattened again a few years later. Well, the answer to that is have someone in power other than Hamas. The one thing I do know is the question of Gaza is, at the moment, an insoluble problem. An insoluble problem because the people of Gaza voted for a terrorist group and have had to pay the price for that and for supporting them. And if you had elections in the West Bank tomorrow, 75 to 80% of the people in the West Bank would vote Hamas. So there goes that dream. But all I know is that if it's an insoluble problem at the moment, it's not just cruel but unusual to demand that Israel solves the problem. It's not just Israel's problem. It was America that pushed for elections in Gaza after the Israeli withdrawal. It's countries like states like Qatar that have been funding the terrorists there. All I know is it cannot be Israel's responsibility alone. I wish that Egypt would take the whole darn thing back, but they don't seem eager to, if you, judging by the size and the strength of their fence.
Right, yeah.
But, I mean, I don't know,
No, I think that's, you know, this whole question of responsibility is such a difficult one, because the same could be asked around the food and aid. Is it Israel's responsibility, or is it the responsibility of all of the countries maybe who actually encouraged this and supported it? It's very difficult. Nobody wants to see anybody in a situation where they are not receiving enough food to survive, but does it make it Israel's responsibility? Maybe from a humanity, from a soul and moral perspective it does, but I'm not sure that it's so clear.
But if it's such an, you know, the thing I mind about is that if it's such an obvious moral thing from the rest of the region, why is the rest of the region so unwilling to help? I mean, you know, my least favorite person of this war against some pretty stiff competition is Queen Rania.
Oh,
and, you know, she does all these interviews about how awful the Israelis
Well, she does do a very good tragic look. She does tragedy, I think, very well. You have to give her that.
I always say, I was at a conference once with her where Eric Schmidt of Google was interviewing her. I've never seen such a slavish interview. Your Majesty, Your Highness, Your Excellency. And he kept saying things like, what would you advise us in the Western democracies to do? I said, she's only got one piece of advice: marry a king. That's it. That's the extent of her advice. Anyhow, but I mention this just because, you know, she does all these interviews where she talks about the Israelis and the Zionists and so on and so forth. No one ever says, what did your father-in-law think of the Palestinians? How did he treat them? Why don't you take them in if you're so keen? Why do you lock them out? Why do all these countries lock them out? Why did Lebanon kick them out? Why did Tunisia kick them out? I mean, just the sheer naked just desire to put it all onto Israel.
There was a question over there. I'm not sure where the mic is.
Thank you. That's a question to Douglas. Howard, I hope we can stay friends. I can ask you this on Shabbos. As a speaker and seeker of truth, just a couple of questions. One, what's your explanation to the fact that truth is so absent? The voice is so absent in the world, so rare to be found, so much that people call you the hero of the Jewish people, and this voice is so rare to actually find. And what's your advice to people on how to find truth in an age where there's so much lies going around in the media?
Well, I always say that if you want to find truth, I mean, you should start small and get larger. I mean, one of the big problems in our society, I say particularly in America, is that nobody, you know, having a different opinion is very 20th century now. Now everyone has different facts. And, you know, I always say, like, America can't knit together again as a society until they agree on, like, one thing. Like what happened yesterday, or who won an election, or whatever. But like it's devastating to a society if you can't agree on what has just happened. And this is going to just get harder, of course, in the years ahead with all the technology and the technological change and all of that. So we are going to have to keep our eyes very firmly fixed. You know, the truth isn't relative. An entire generation has been told that it is, epitomized by my least favorite phrase, my truth. You don't have your truth. You might have your personality, we'll see. You might have your view, but you don't have your truth. My view is that much of what has caused the relativism of our age is not actually that people are wildly relativist. It's that they can't face truths. They've been mollycoddled.
You were going to go with that movie line, you can't
It
handle
can't
the
handle.
truth.
I almost
I know
said
you were
it.
almost
Yeah,
there,
I
I
almost
thought,
said it.
I heard it.
But I genuinely think that a lot of what has caused some of the problems of our age, certainly in the developed countries, is an unwillingness to face up to unpalatable truths. Like the simple fact that, I often say, like, the jungle is real. There are really monsters out there. There are really bad people out there. I know you don't want to believe it. I know you want everything to be like the campus at Berkeley on a nice Wednesday afternoon, but I got news for you. Not everyone thinks like you, and they're not gonna. And I think that's on a range of things. Our societies are very bad at facing up to basic truths. I mean, even the most basic facts of life are now in dispute. The most basic facts of biology are in dispute. Everyone has to pretend that we've forgotten the first thing we knew as a species, boy or girl. And once that goes up for grabs, and it's all just the view of a bigoted nurse who says, oh, I'll call this one a boy, but it might grow up to be a girl, who knows? I mean, that's why I mind about those sorts of things. I think we've had a lot of things, one after another, that have totally ripped apart the idea of observable, demonstrable truth. And we need to knit it back together again, because the world doesn't wait for us. It's like people are scared of death. They don't like to talk about death. Everyone behaves as if we all live forever. We're further away from the reality of death in our societies than ever before. Well, you've got a big surprise coming.
We're going to make this the last question over there.
So you mentioned that you spoke to Netanyahu and said that the war won't be over until Iran is dealt with. Do you think that this is possible, A, with the current Israeli government, and B, with the underlying political instability in the country?
Well, I mean, who knows what the coalition is going to be in the future, or what, whether there'll be elections, or I would just say on Netanyahu that I think that there's always lots of ways in which you can sort of avoid dealing with things, and one of them in Israel and in the wider world is making everything a Netanyahu problem. As I said earlier, pretty much everyone would be doing the same thing. But one of the interesting things I hear from very strong critics of his is that they never actually treat him they never deal with the real man. And what I mean by that is, you quite often hear, in Israel especially, they say things like, oh, he just wants to remain in power, or he just wants to avoid trials, and this sort of thing. And I always say, whenever I hear that, and you hear it more and more as the months go on, I always say, look, just understand the nature of the man. This is a man who, from the cradle, had this ear, and the security of the state of Israel. It's the guiding thing in his life. And the protection of the Jewish state is his life's work. You might disagree with him, you might dislike him, you might think he's corrupt, you might think anything like that. But if you don't recognize that truth, you're shadowboxing. And I think the truth of it is, between us,
Just keep it here if you don't mind. Yeah.
as a friend of mine always says, I'm not indiscreet, it's the people I talk to. But between us, I think I put to him the question all Israelis wanted to ask, which is what went wrong? What went wrong on the 7th? It was very interesting seeing him trying to... I knew he wouldn't be able to answer, frankly, and take responsibility of any kind, because his political opponents would use it against him, and that would be that. But I genuinely do think that the fact that this happened on his watch must haunt him deeply. And there's only one thing he can do to save his legacy, which is a firm victory. Whatever that looks like, he must be able to deliver a victory of the kind that we were talking about earlier, that it must be decisive. I would say that the best thing is that, I mean, I was speaking to somebody yesterday in Johannesburg who said most conflicts end around a negotiating table. And I said to him, that's flat out wrong. Flat out wrong. Some conflicts end around the negotiating table. Most conflicts end because one side wins and one loses. And the side that's won knows that it's won, and the side that's lost knows that it's lost. I believe that the reason why Israel has been caught in constant conflict since the foundation is because people will not allow Israel to win. They won't allow it to win. They allow it to put out a quarter of the fire in Gaza in 2009. I've spoken to the people who were in that operation who say we could have finished Hamas then. The international community and everyone else made us pull back. I think that the victory has to be, to that extent, as decisive as possible. And I think it's possible. And I think for Israel there's no other way. As I said earlier, it's just intolerable to be stuck in a situation of endless cycles of war in which international opinion ebbs away, international support ebbs away, and much more. But if this is the last one, can I say something?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
I was going to ask you one final question.
You were?
No, but you go ahead. Go ahead.
You ask it.
Well, I was going to say to you this is, these are dark times, and these have been dark times. What gives you hope that times will not always remain as they are for Israel's supporters, for Jews, for those who seek truth and goodness in the world?
Well, I'll tell you the main thing is that I believe the truth wins out because I think that it has been the case in not every occasion, but in very many occasions historically. Sometimes people say, why do you keep doing what you do? And I said, well, but the history of mankind has been to a great extent the piercing of darkness. The knowledge that one truth can pierce 100 lies. The knowledge that one thing people recognize to be true can pierce 1,000 lies. People in this country have known this in the past. I always think of the history of communism. An even greater lie than the lies against Israel today, and which had such vast dominance over such vast swathes of the globe. And the whole system was rotten and evil. And if you were a writer like Grossman in the 40s, or like Solzhenitsyn in the 60s, or Václav Havel, you could have looked at it and thought, how am I going to bring this down? Or you could do what they did, which is to do what they could to bring it down. I once spoke to somebody, there was a guy who was a double agent of the KGB for the British and Americans, a fascinating man, called Oleg Gordievsky. He's quite a famous figure because he was briefing both the Soviets and the British at the Helsinki Accords. And the Soviets didn't know, but Margaret Thatcher did. And it was very interesting. I was with him and a minister who was with him when he came out in the late 80s. And this former minister in the British government said, Oleg, do you remember what you said to me when we got you out? They extracted him from Moscow in a pretty daring operation. They said, do you remember what you said to me? And he said, no. And the minister said, I remember. He said, we were walking across the hills in the South Downs of England. And I said to you, Oleg, why did you do what you did? And Oleg Gordievsky replied, if I'd been a writer, I'd have written against that system. And if I'd have been a painter, I'd have painted against it. But I was a spy, so I spied against it.
Oh, wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
And I believe that communism was brought down not just by the heroism of millions and millions of people and the suffering of countless of millions of people, but by the heroism of men and women who just stood up against it. Solzhenitsyn put an axe into the wall of communism. Václav Havel hit another in Mandelstam, all of these people, and they brought it crumbling down, and a system which we thought in our lifetimes would last our lifetimes is now a memory. And young people don't know what you're talking about. Well, maybe this can be like that as well. Maybe. And as I say, there are two things that, if I can say in my non-Jewish Aliyah way, we have
I
going.
think you've earned the right to say we, yeah.
Have going
I'd say
for
so.
us. One is the knowledge and the determination of the Jewish people across history. As my late friend Jonathan Sachs used to list off at bewildering speed the number of empires that thought they were going to see off the Jews, and the Jews saw off. And as he said, here we still are to say, Am Israel Chai. And that's one thing, is the knowledge of the history, which is very, very important, and to keep this all in a proper context where we are at the moment, where things have been in the past, where they are now. At the very least at the moment, I've said quite often, but it might bear repeating, the times historically that Jews are at risk is when they are prominent and weak. Prominent and weak is a devastating position for Jews to be in. It was what the situation of Jews in Vienna in the 20th century. It was the situation of Jews in Spain in the 15th century. Prominent and weak is a very bad position to be in. Now, that means that Jews have two options. The other is to keep your heads down and not do anything remarkable with your lives. My view is that's not a goer.
No.
Jews will be disproportionately...
Give us another option.
Right, the other option is prominent and strong. Now that's what Israel is, that's what Israel has to be. And that's why I say the second and final thing on that is, and I really do sound like I'm from the Jewish Agency now, but if you are down about the situation in this country at all, treat yourself to a visit to Israel.
Absolutely.
Because I guarantee you, you will be revived by it. And you'll be revived by so many things in the society, but the thing that will revive you most is what I said before, the young generation. They have been weighed in the balance, and they've been proved to be magnificent.
Well, I would say without any question that we have been revived by you, and you brought us that bit of hope and positivity, even if through a very, very difficult conversation. I think that it has been absolutely tremendous. It's been an amazing experience. I've never seen a crowd of Jews behave like this. Never. Never in my life have I seen them sit and just pay attention for all this time. I don't know what's wrong with you guys. It's like they're not even Jewish anymore. But okay, either way, thank you for spending the time with us. Thank you to the Jewish Report for putting this together and for what I think has been a phenomenal evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you and good night. Thank you.